Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Has anything creepy ever happened to you in the woods? Share your experience.
I used to jog out in the woods early each morning for a bit. I lived near a nature reserve country park, and the routes through it were perfect for jogging. During winter, it was sometimes a little creepy to run through, especially if I had no music, but mostly nothing ever happened. My eyes played tricks on me in the dark a few times, so I used to see some weird things. One time I swear I saw some horses in the field standing upright on their hind legs, staring at me. I remember once, though, I was jogging on a nice summer morning. The air was really fresh and the sun was already making it quite warm when out of the shade of trees. I got to a part where the path forks, and I generally go right to loop back around and go home. This time I thought, screw it, I'll go left for a change. I didn't feel ready to go back yet, so I hopped the sty and headed further in. So the first thing I noticed was how cold it was. I figured it was because the trees were more dense here, but it still felt a bit weird, not sure how else to describe it. It was also deadly silent, apart from my feet on the dirt path. After about 5 minutes of running, I started to get a little panicky. The trees around were so dense it felt really isolated, even though I knew houses and the safety of civilization were only a 5-minute walk away. It still felt like I was miles out in the middle of nowhere. I saw some movement to my right that shocked me slightly, like a dark blur followed by some rustling of leaves. Just a bird or something, probably. Still, it was enough to put me on edge, and the more dense the trees became, the darker and colder it got, and I found myself looking around quickly and reacting to the slightest noise. After 15 minutes, I could see the sun lighting up the exit ahead, and I've never felt so relieved. The atmosphere in there was something else. From behind me, I heard something running on the path, and I mean the unmistakable noise of something bounding towards me. I felt chills down my spine and just ran as hard as I could. I didn't even bother looking back. Whatever it was practically on my heels, and I could hear snarling and growling, very dog-like. As I put a last burst to get out into the sun, I felt like it was breathing on my hand, and the noise of the growling felt like it was right next to my ear. I burst out onto the main path and looked around to see what was there. Nothing. Everything was still. I didn't really want to think too hard about it at the time, as I was just too freaked out that all I wanted to do was go home, so I took the most direct route back. Not really sure if it was some animal chasing me or all in my head, but either way I didn't go back after that.
Used to have a shed in the woods where we kept chickens. Be me, 15 years old. Supposed to feed and give water every day. Slept all day. Wake up. It's 11 p.m. I love the chickens though, so I get ready to go outside. Plus, this isn't the first time I've had to go out to see them at night. Grab a high-powered flashlight. Snow is a foot or so deep. Trudge through it to get to the shed. Unlock the door. The chickens wake up, delighted to see me, and make lots of noise. About 10 minutes pass by of me feeding them, changing water, etc. Hear the quiet crunching of snow outside. Grab a water bottle, turn to the door, expect it to be the neighbor's dog. Open the door. It's a mountain lion. We both stood looking at each other for maybe a second or less, but it seemed longer. Lion bolts away before I can do anything. Step out of the shed and watch it bound off into the horizon of the woods. Its figure is easy to follow because of the moonlit snow. Go back into the shed and wrap up what I was doing. Lock it. Prop a large branch against the door for extra measure. Head home. The door to the shed eventually got ripped apart, but probably not by CougarBro.
When I was 14 or so, a friend and I wanted to sleep at another friend's house in another town, 4 to 5 kilometers away. We went there by bus and spent the day there waiting for him. At around 9 p.m., friend 3 said that something came up and we couldn't sleep at his house. It was already dark then, but we stayed there till midnight or so. We had 2 options: a very long way by a busy road which had streetlights all the way, and a shortcut which had no lights. We chose the shortcut and started walking. It was already pitch black. We came to a spot where the path was surrounded by woods, and deeper into the woods was a lake where we went swimming often. We didn't talk much, and all of a sudden I heard it. I still get goosebumps. Imagine the creepiest laugh a small child could make. It was in the middle of the night around 1 a.m. It was cold, so no one could be swimming there, and it was in the middle of the night. What scared the shit out of me was that this laugh was the only thing we heard. No other voices, no footsteps, nothing. There were no houses nearby, and the laugh sounded like 50 meters away at the highest. I couldn't say anything, I was like paralyzed, but we kept walking. At this moment, I thought maybe this sound was in my head or something. After 1 minute of power walking, my friend turns and says, "Did you hear that too?" I don't answer, and we both start running the rest of the way home. My friend can confirm this and experienced the exact same thing he told me. I still try to avoid going past there alone or at night.
When I lived back home, moved in 2009, up by my house, parents have now moved twice, they were basically removing the woods and building houses. About 20 years prior, it was all woods with only a couple houses, basically considered the country just outside the city. So, one of the sad things about it was that the deer population was dwindling because their habitat was dwindling. Deer would often get hit in bizarre places. You'd find them miles away from the woods in busy residential areas. Like they got so confused, they decided to head into the city to die. I liked taking pictures of them. I was lonely after moving from my old high school and decided to explore what was left of the woods about 2 weeks after we moved there. So all this prairie is up on a hill, and some of the woods extends into this big gully. I wanted to explore the gully after not finding deer, and while it was a struggle getting down, I made it. There's a flat, woody area, then several small cliff faces, and then the gully goes deeper. I could never get all the way in because it was so steep and choked with foliage. I mainly explored the boulders, the bottoms of some of the cliffs, and some of the little holes. I was stupid and didn't know those were probably coyote holes, and didn't even know porcupines were native until I got a couple quills to the shoulder trying to find my cat in a storm drainage pipe. Anyways, I was exploring these areas about twice a month. Sometimes I convinced my brother to come until something happened that terrified him and he refused to go. I'll talk about that later. The boulders freaked me out. I remember in a science class my teachers talking about till, big rocks moved from a massive flood forever ago. I figured they were from that, since they seemed quite out of place. They were like little islands. You could climb some and there was stuff growing on top of a few. At the base there would be little hollows, presumably coyote dens. Around them, the ground was soft and covered in pine needles. The first time I went, there were little bones everywhere, very clean, typical leftovers from animals. The next time there was a whole spine of an animal, big, like a deer. My brother wanted to take it home, but then decided against it. A couple weeks earlier, he had bought a German flag from the Salvation Army to add to his World War II collection, and my mom had been pissed. So nasty deer spine was probably out of the question. Every time after that, bones would disappear and new ones would appear. The spine was gone, but now there were small animal skulls, or even partially decomposed small animals. We'd found dead cats, which sucked because all 4 of our cats disappeared within weeks of moving there. Our parents said it was probably hawks. On the 4th or 5th time we visited, we found what looked like a man-made hollow at the base of a cliff. It was only about 3 or 4 person deep, but there was a lot of graffiti in it, little animal bones, and most unsettling, a large pentagram in the middle. It wasn't that interesting, so we hung out at the hobo house, several large rocks that looked to be moved into a sort of shelter. Then we went and took pictures of the cars. There were 3 cars in the gully. One was super old, one of those long, heavy ones, maybe 1950s era. We took the license plates. We then climbed up under another cliff. It was a challenge because the ground was constantly shifting little rocks, like the cliffs were disintegrating. We'd often go home with cuts and bruises from falling. Around the base of the cliff was discarded old stuff like typewriters, keyboards, old computers. Well, old to me. You know, those boxy ones. Sometimes they look arranged. That cliff in particular also had this weird section on it, like the cliff was wearing a stone mask. A very thin person, like my brother, could fit behind it. I'd begged him to go in for a week and see if anything was back there. So I was on one side and he squeezed himself in. At first we were laughing because he said it would suck if he got stuck and they had to drill through to rescue him. Then he got quiet suddenly. Then he started screaming and it sounded like he was having a panic attack. I could hear him struggling to get out and started reaching in, and to this day the first hand I felt didn't feel like his. It felt feminine and cold, and it let go. Then I felt his hand and pulled him out. He was crying, and he had a lot of scratches. Bear in mind the rock around that area was like slate, so super sharp and breaks easily. He said he wanted to go home. We started walking fast, and he eventually ran the mile or so back and left me behind to continue walking. When I got home, I got grounded for taking him there. He was distraught all day, but when I got him alone, he said while he was back there, it went from being narrow to feeling endless. He heard whispering that got closer and felt something pulling at the bottom of his pants. He wet the bed for months after and got night terrors, but it didn't stop me from still visiting the area on my own. I would later regret it. So after a few months, 3 weeks of it were me being grounded for traumatizing my brother, I went back at a later time. I rode my bike there, and I remember leaning it against a tree. I know I did this. I started drawing before getting bored and decided to start walking down a dirt road that ran next to the woods. There were some houses farther up, where it was still almost undeveloped, so basically original prairie houses, and they were private property wood sections around them. I'd never seen anyone enforcing against trespassing, so I figured it wouldn't hurt. I was supposed to go to a friend's birthday later that day and wanted to kill time. I was also hoping the dirt road would lead back to a developed area and could possibly be a shortcut, or at least a scenic route. I don't know what happened. I remember walking down that dirt road, out to the prairie and seeing a house. I remember feeling like something wasn't right. The sky didn't look a normal color. The house looked wrong, almost comically huge. I remember what felt like miles upon miles of endless rolling hills, but never reaching the house. And then all of a sudden, coming to, and walking down a road about a mile from my house. My parents pulled up and started screaming at me, saying I missed the party, the police and my friends were looking for me, and where the hell had I been? They took me to the emergency room because I was crying and confused. I was gone for 11 hours. My bike was in the garage like I'd come home and then left again. I didn't have a concussion. There weren't any drugs in my system, except depression meds. Nothing. It felt like I had time warped or something. There were not miles and miles of untouched prairie up there. The last time I made it there, I found an old, busted-up barbed wire fence with a lot of hair and fur stuck to it. It was unsettling because there were tons of windflowers about, but this ugly scar in the middle of it, it was a ton of fur and hair, like a whole deer had skinned itself in it. Plus, I'm pretty sure there were chunks of human hair. Painfully big chunks. That day I had also planned to draw, but when I sat down, the ground felt unnaturally hot. It was probably 70 degrees out, but it felt like 100 degrees under my ass. I know deer could have laid there before I sat, but I'd been in the area, with that spot in sight, for about 15 to 20 minutes before I actually sat. Never saw any deer. I got seriously creeped out and left. The hum of cicadas probably didn't help. Even now, that sound freaks me out.
When you think about how much trackless, extremely remote wilderness there is in the world, hell, even North America, it's not very difficult to believe that there are strange things going on. I live in Wyoming, and there are places in this state that no man, at least no modern man, has ever seen. Canadian wilderness is some of the most impenetrable and rugged in the world, and even in today's age of advanced scientific mapping technology, much of it remains undiscovered. My boyfriend is a Lakota Sioux, and his mother and grandma always told him to love and respect nature, but to always be wary, even fearful, when you're out on the prairie or in the woods. They told stories of the deer woman and strange spirits that would whisk you away, never to be seen again, or of victims of such who would be returned mad or blind or mute and terrified.
About 6 months ago, I was in the Sierra Nevada Golden Trout Wilderness. I wandered off of the trail I was on and hiked up a small ridge. I was at around 10,000 feet. And ancient foxtail pines surrounded me. They were all gnarled and sort of eerie to begin with, and I realized I was surrounded by a small grove of about 6 of them, all arranged in a circle. I think the fact that these trees were all most likely around 800 to 1400 years old has something to do with what happened next. I took the gum out of my mouth and stuck it onto one of the trees. I was under the impression that one day someone would walk by, see it and think, haha, that's funny, I guess someone else was here. Suddenly I felt terror, pure terror. A massive booming sound started filling the air around me. I couldn't understand what the hell was going on, but I swear I could feel the vibration in my body from this sound. It was almost like the trees were angry at me. I was actually carrying a gun in the front pocket of my down vest, but I didn't feel safe. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, and the quicker I ran, the quieter the sound got, but probably around halfway down the ridge I could still hear it. It was faint, but still there. This noise didn't fade in. It abruptly erupted out of nowhere. I have never felt fear like that before, but the next time I head out there, I'm going back. I don't think I'll find those same trees, but I'll definitely find tons more of them.
Once I was camping alone in the woods drunk, and had a difficult home life as a kid. 1 kilometer from the car, 5 kilometers from home. Off an access trail in a secret clearing I made for that purpose. Dense bushland. Campfire and music in earphones. Went off away from the light of the fire to shit, heard a lot of noise back by the fire 50 meters away. Something was kicking the hell out of the fire, embers everywhere, loud as hell by this point. Only a complete psycho could be capable of this at 2 a.m. in such a remote area, so I just bolted blindly into the bush. Ankles and legs battered beyond belief from rocks, logs, etc., bleeding and drunk as hell, absolutely terrified. Ran about 200 meters away and curled into a ball under a little rock overhang, then froze and listened, not moving a muscle. Heard nothing for hours, but too scared to return until daylight, ended up passing out at some point and waking up at sunrise freezing cold. Walked cautiously back to camp, campfire remnants everywhere but no sign of life. Packed up and left, never went back. The walk out I just carried my knife visibly looking back over my shoulder every few dozen paces.
Innawoods in Canada, be me at 14 years old in the mid-2000s. I live in rural maritime Canada. Lots of woods and trails surround my house that is just outside, but still technically in the town I live in. I love to explore the trails that have been there since God knows when. Some aren't even trails people use, but rather animal trails. I was hanging out with my best friend at the time. Decide we should go for a walk in the woods through the back trails that lead out into town. At one point we mapped all the trails. One trail starts where my house is, so we start there and begin walking. A little while into walking, we realized that it's hard to breathe for some reason, as if the humidity was cranked to an insane level. We come across this spot that doesn't have many trees. The ground is all cracked and dry, and we actually don't really recognize this area of the woods. We talked back and forth about where this is and how we missed this area of the woods, especially since it's about half an acre in size of just barren land rocks all around. Decide against going into town so that we'll walk back to my house and ask my dad if he'll take us. We start walking back and it takes a lot longer to get back to my house. It's literally a straight trail to my house with one small deviation that leads directly to my house. We look around and realize that it got real cold and quiet all of a sudden. Find the deviation and think, thank God, finally. We went down the trail leading to my house. Somewhere along the way my friend disappears, but I don't remember where. I end up at the trailhead where my house is, but it isn't there. It's just a cleared off space with nothing there. I start to panic. I start to feel really hot and lightheaded. I passed out, wake up at the trailhead and everything is normal. I found my friend about 100 feet up the trail, very confused and dehydrated. We come back to my house, drink like 2 liters of water each, and are otherwise fine. It was weird as F.
Reverse in a wood spook. For half the year, I live as a hermit in the sticks for fun. I work in a city the other half. Literally no one around, the nearest village of 20 people 100 kilometers away, the nearest road 80 kilometers. I occasionally take long day trips from my tiny-ass cabin, sleep in the woods, etc. During these excursions, I often travel at night. The woods by moonlight on winter nights are something else. One such night in late autumn, I'm 70 kilometers away from my cabin in the woods, skiing. It's maybe 2 a.m., all quiet, some moonlight. A helicopter flies past, maybe a kilometer away. Not that unusual, Norwegian air ambulances sometimes do that, plus there's the border patrol nearby and the very occasional army drill. I can't make out whether it's an air ambo or army stuff. I ski on for an hour or so until I hear the engine in the distance. Figure they've landed aiding an emergency. Some lone skier like me, or an army drill with some poor dude having developed frostbite. Head their way, idle curiosity. Turns out they've managed to land on a frozen bog, and have 3 men scouring the terrain with flashlights, hollering for the missing person, acting like he's nearby somewhere. One of them eventually spots me atop the hill overlooking them. All 3 freeze. I consider waving, but since I'm not their man, I hesitate. I'm on a hill too steep and rocky to just ski down and don't want to invite them to climb up just to find out I'm just a random gawker. While the moment stretches between us, a fourth man emerges from the small birches some 50 meters behind them. He's their wanted man, half limping on skis towards them, could be a soldier by the looks of him, not in full working order. The rescue folk notice the man, run to him, help him to the chopper. The maybe soldier then notices me as they help him on the stretcher. Starts screaming like mad, or looks to be doing. I can't really hear anything over the engine and distance. I'm not sure this is such a great time to wave, either. One of the emergency men starts off towards me while the chopper waits and the two others stay with the freaked out soldier or not. I wave, he stops and with a hesitation, waves too. I think the hesitation is odd. I just can't ski straight down the slope, so turn around and ski the other way, disappearing from his sight. When I make it to lower ground level to where I think the man is, the chopper flies past overhead. I see them, but by this time I'm covered black on black by the dwarf birches and small firs, so I don't think they can spot me. I kind of shrug off the whole do, eventually, head home in a few days after camping and some hunting. When next I'm in civilization in the late winter and soak up the local news and rumors, I'm told 2 skiers had to be rescued from a week-long trek after the one snapping a leg. The OK one had left the injured one in a camp and skied off for a small fall so he could get a signal and send out an SOS. When he'd come back to fetch the other man to a spot nearer where the chopper could land, he discovered his friend had died while he was gone, presumably a heart attack from the exertion and shock. A rescue team had picked up the other chap, who, I gather, had thought I was his dead mate who came to wave him off. I suppose he couldn't reasonably have expected a lone skier. No one goes alone, my cabin is not common knowledge, there are no hunters or trappers in the area, to have just stumbled across his rescue in the dead of night 100 kilometers from the nearest anything and magically disappeared on the crew then. Anticlimactic, I know, but it was such a weird coincidence I thought I'd write it down. That poor dude, though. The sight of me looking down on him from that fell must have freaked him out quite a bit. Presumably he'd insisted there could be no one else down there and been so panicked or convinced that the crew hauled him out of there. I kind of wish I could let them know it was just me.
Be a young laddie. Live in a woods near a military base, pretty isolated. Only one real friend around for miles. One night I hear a loud thrum noise, thinking it's some weird kind of artillery. Morning, I went out in a woods with my friend. A large, huge oil drum-looking thing is in this spot in the woods. Rusted and overgrown, looks like it has been there for years. The side is rotted open. There is absolutely no way this thing could have been here all this time without us finding it before. It's about the size of a goddamn trailer, big enough for us to stand up inside it. Eventually, it became a hangout for me and my friend. We have little fires there and drink there. Eventually, it becomes a cool little hangout spot. Piles up with bottles, eventually forgetting its weird origin. Years pass. One night I heard the thrum sound again. Go out to the drum spot. It's gone. No indentation or bare spot or anything to even indicate it was ever even there. Giant oil drum and all the trash that was inside it is gone without a trace. Godspeed, oil drum buddy. Whatever and wherever you are.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.